Welcome back to Second Breakfast, and welcome back to the world of Arrakis. We're recording these early because I literally cannot stop reading this book. So we still have not seen, I don't know exactly when this is coming out, but we still haven't seen the second movie. I'm probably going to finish the book before then.
Probably. The urgency is also that Cam doesn't want to keep reading until we've completed the episode for book 2 of Dune.
I don't want to clutter my thoughts. I want to give you the best possible version of this discussion.
So poor Cam, because of scheduling, has had to put off reading for 4 days, and I know it's been absolute agony for him.
So Maggie and I are Dune enthusiasts. We adore the first movie, watched it a bunch of times. Maggie started the first book, and I am blazing through the first book.
Yes. If you haven't listened to our first Dune episode, you should do that. Sorry.
We did an episode about the first Dune movie, and we did an episode about the first book of the first book. And shocking no one, I liked it. It was wonderful.
So glad to hear.
Things are getting darker. Things are getting more complicated. And I should, just to signpost clearly at the beginning here, in this second book of the first book, we do pass the events of the first movie. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm not going to outright spoil anything.
Okay.
There'll be possible light gesturing.
Okay.
But I'll do my best to obscure all the particulars.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Mostly, that's
for you.
Me. I mean, also the listener, but also me, because I'm not even finished with book 1.
Right.
So
and
I'm excited for this.
The first thing that jumped out to me about this book, and I read this one faster. I sprinted through this book.
You did, yeah.
Not that I didn't retain it. I'm a skilled reader. But I mean that I read it. I mainlined this book.
Right, yeah.
I didn't even play games.
No.
I didn't watch movies.
You haven't really
I
been
just
playing
been
games.
reading
You've just been reading.
Well, they had Excel with that. But
oh, sure. No screens.
The thing that jumped out at me first for book 2 here is the incredible balance of this story.
Okay.
Because I was saying last time that I was worried that this book was just going to be like a life lessons with the Fremen.
Oh, yeah.
As Paul and Jessica
yes.
are wandering through Arrakis.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that at all,
of
course.
Excellent.
There were
Great.
moments of that, but yeah, there are moments of culture and lessons with every group of people in a book.
Sure.
But it wasn't that at all. And every time I felt like I was getting too comfortable with Paul's storyline, with the Fremen characters that we're getting to know, Frank Herbert kind of goosed me.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
a goose is where you pinch someone's butt.
Frank Herbert pinched your butt.
He did.
That's really
from beyond.
That's pretty. Imagine if that's your encounter with a ghost. Is just the ghost of Frank Herbert pinching your butt.
Every time I felt like I was getting comfortable with the main storyline, we were jolted away into something else. You would get an amazing Harkonnen chapter.
Yeah.
A cutaway to a follow-up for a lost friend or someone you didn't think you'd see again. Or we'd be hit in the Fremen storyline with some big lightning bolt revelation. I talked about those last time. There's this one right towards the end of book 1 that wasn't included in the first movie that really threw me in a great way.
Cool.
There are more of those here, but the way they're deployed, it feels like Frank Herbert's kind of gathering steam in how he's writing this story. So instead of just being revelations dropped into, sequences between Jessica and Paul that are about world building or history, or instead of fleshing out the world, it now feels like those revelations are almost cliffhangers.
Oh, okay.
Kind of marking us through Paul's journey.
Yeah, awesome.
And we're getting more and more red flags and reservations as Paul gets more power.
Okay.
As he's more capable. As you see the roller coaster slowly creeping higher and higher, and the fall's coming.
Okay, so things are happening with Paul. It's not just
no.
Paul's wandering through the desert learning about the Fremen, and then it's nicely intercut with other things. It's also that Paul's story is really advancing. Okay, awesome.
And you get the sense, you feel the world expanding.
Cool.
And there's this sense developing that I can only describe as a space-time impotence. There's this inevitability and doom flooding through the story now. And I think it's sort of interesting that those feelings, that kind of that pit in your stomach that's developing as things get bigger and bigger, and you're worried that this main character who you're following and you're sympathetic to, that he might start making the wrong decisions.
Okay.
Or that there might be too much power on his shoulders, or you don't trust his advisors. You see this thing start to teeter.
That's cool, because you don't really get that, at least from what I remember from the movie. You don't get that in part 1 very much, in book 1. It's more just establishing Paul as this, interesting chosen one who seems good, but, has these subtle temptations or hesitancies, but for the most part is, you're on board with him. He seems
Well,
like he's good natured.
The more and more things seem faded, I think the more dangerous it becomes.
Okay.
Do you remember there's that moment in the first movie when they're landing on Arrakis where they're kind of filled in on some of the backstories and local religions that the Bene Gesserit might have planted on Arrakis to endear them to Jessica and Paul? That they think Paul might be this like chosen one who fits into the legend.
Yes.
As the story goes and more of those things seem vindicated, you see more trust and more power that might be allotted to Paul. And that heightens his capacity to ruin the world or save it.
Okay,
it just
interesting.
heightens the stakes. And I think it's
Awesome.
It's not incidental that these kind of cascading red flags coincide with the expansion of Herbert's naming conventions.
Oh, okay.
By this point, you know, more than, I think audiobook-wise, it's like 75% of the way through the book now. This is a chunky section of this novel.
Yeah.
By this point, Paul is known by so many titles and labels and nicknames. Different groups within the Fremen have different names for him. Lady Jessica has a different name for him. There are all of these kind of bits of mythology, these parallels of legends that are being attributed to Paul that he feels more and more doomed and fated, as I'm saying. We're getting more history from these chapter opening quotes. Remember I said those felt like they delighted in spoilers or hints about the future?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And what will come to pass. There's that feeling of someone walking over your grave, where we're seeing this in real time start to snowball as he's becoming more than a man. He seems larger, more powerful, more consequential. There's a bit of that Oppenheimer thing, where someone says you're not just self-important, you're actually important. Mm-hmm. There's some of that kind of happening here.
Wow.
And I don't know when or if that turn is going to take place. I'm just trying to highlight the omens I'm seeing.
Okay, yeah.
But if it does, I think the interesting sleight of hand trick is that I don't know if I'll be able to pinpoint the exact moment where there's a turn, where you go from...
Well, that's what's so, like, that's true to life, right?
Yes, where do you go from famous to infamous? Is it just inertia? This book is really starting to remind me of my favorite parts of our discussions of the Witcher series.
Yeah.
And that series spiraled through questions of destiny. And the way Dune is handling those topics, a lighter touch. The word of destiny is not on every page.
Yeah.
But the way it's being done here is so much more stomach churning.
Cool. Is a lot of time passing in this chunk? Like, Paul's not that... I'm trying to think of how old Paul is. Like, I don't think he's that old at the very beginning.
No, I don't think much time is passing. It all seems fairly real time, the way we're bouncing back and forth between people.
Okay.
But
because this seems like something that could really happen over like 10 years, but it's interesting that it's happening.
I believe
quickly.
There's a sizable time jump between books 1 and 2.
Oh, okay.
In the series, and then of course there are like thousands of years.
Oh,
of
you don't
time
mean
jumps.
books 1 and 2 of Dune?
No, I'm sorry. I mean Dune and Dune Messiah.
Yes. Okay.
The other thing that I'm really noticing is this dialogue focus that I talked about last time as being sort of the style of hard genre writing that Frank Herbert's doing here that makes it all feel so accessible and engaging and alive. It never feels like a stuffy, stiff history of this faraway land. It all feels so alive and conversational and fluid.
That's hard to do. That's really impressive.
Incredibly hard.
Especially you are like really particular about what you like in your world building. Like you don't even like the phrase world building.
No, I don't.
Like you don't like homework books, as you call them.
No, not at all. I don't. Like the difference between us in this respect is that you like maps.
I do. Yeah.
In the beginning of books.
I want to see a map. I want to know where the stuff is. I want to get a sense of lay of the land.
No, I don't even want the author to be thinking like that.
That's why it drove me so nuts when Sapkowski didn't use any in The Witcher.
I delighted in that.
That's why
I want vignettes.
I need like visual connections to help understand what's going on. Anyway.
Short stories. Gesture at a larger picture. But just play with me on this level. The thing that I'm noticing as we get deeper into the story and the world is almost accidentally more built out because you've spent more time in it, because you know more of the history, is that Herbert is slightly expanding the way he's telling the story. It's still a very strict dialogue focus, but I'm noticing an increasing importance for physical observations.
Okay.
And I don't mean physical description.
I was going to say, remember you said there wasn't much description in book 1.
No, it's, and I'm glad I made the Shelob comparison last time because it's more of that. It's these interspersed observations. You get fractal images So you don't get like the narrative, traditional up and down of what a character looks like.
Right. They had brown hair and a long nose, and
exactly.
Right.
You don't get the camera like panning along someone's body. It's not that. It's these fleeting descriptions of features. And it might not even be about like, is the nose prominent? Is it wide? Is it recessed? It's about, the nose just moved, which means he just reacted to what I'm saying.
So are these observations like from the point of view of characters?
Yes.
It's not like a third, it's not a like objective narrator. It's
it always feels
character.
Rooted in character.
Well, that's awesome.
That's why I use the word observation.
Yeah.
It feels like it's the thing your eye is drawn to. Mm-hmm. In the same way when you watch a movie, your eye is pulled all over the screen. But unless you're going to do like incredible zoom ins on everything that happens, you can't completely curate the movement of the viewer's eye on screen.
Right.
In a book, you can. And I think that's one of those impossible advantages of the novel form.
Yeah.
So getting these little fragmented looks, these movements and features, instead of big traditional physical descriptions, it keeps me rooted in the characters in the same way that the dialogue focus does.
Yeah, I really like that. That sounds great.
Because I feel like I think I've told this story before on the podcast of the way my mom used to watch movies very actively.
Yeah.
Like when she would watch Jason Bourne movies, which were some of her favorite, whenever he was chasing someone in a car or something, she would memorize the license plate to like help out.
Because it might be important later. Yeah.
I feel like Frank Herbert has that sort of intensity because all of these little physical observations, they're fragmented and weaponized. They're all from a character's point of view. It's the things they're clocking and looking for. So it feels like you are in the same place as the characters where you are cataloging all of these little details as context when it's necessary.
Yeah, I'm curious about this shift from book one to book two. Like, do you think that book two truly has a lot more of these observations, as you're calling them, or do you think you're just noticing them more? Because the dialogue is something you more obviously notice right away, I
think part of it is that our main narrative is still with Paul, but in the first book, he's largely in a comfortable position within House Atreides, on Arrakis, surrounded by friends and family.
Sure.
And now he's out there having to watch every step with people who might want to kill him and he doesn't understand. He doesn't know their customs. He doesn't want to insult them. So he has to be a lot more reserved and perceptive.
Yeah, and observant.
So it feels like a natural growth in the story. It's a natural evolution.
That's fascinating.
Like, I'm 2/3 of the way through this book now. I could tell you a couple characters' hair color, maybe, and general way of dressing, but the rest of it is temperament. I know these characters on that level where I can tell you about their experiences and how they react to things. I can tell you their plans and desires, but there's very little physicality.
I like that. I think I used to be a person who really needed a solid physical description. I think that's just part of like growing up. Like when you're a kid or a teenager, you need a lot of help visualizing. At least I did. That's why you see a lot of that in YA. There's like 4 paragraphs describing what Katniss looks like in the first chapter of the Hunger Games when it's like so unnecessary to the narrative. But now, like I think like reading the Witcher books was really helpful for that for me because there's hardly any character description. We know that Yennefer has black hair and purple eyes. We know that Geralt has white hair
and yellow eyes sometimes.
Yeah, and then Triss has chestnut hair.
Yeah.
And that's like, we know hair
Ciri's
color.
got white hair.
We know hair color sometimes, but we don't know. There's not a lot of like physical description, especially of like the world that they're in. Like sometimes there are little details, but again, it's like details that are like really important to understanding what's going on. And so I think like reading that kind of like trained me to like let go of those. I don't want to say training wheels because that's implying like advancement, but I just mean that they help me kind of let go of that. And now I'm much more intrigued by this style that you're talking about, where it's like, I want to understand who the character is and what they're motivated by. And I think that's kind of the way so far, into George R. R. Martin's world. There's not a lot of physical description of people's like physical traits either. There's a lot of description of like the room that they're in or the food that they're eating or the armor that they're wearing or something like that.
Like ambiance.
But like I know that Arya has kind of a long face.
Yeah.
I don't know what color her hair is. I don't know how long it is. I don't think we even know how long, like what Sansa looks like yet. So I like that. That's cool.
And I think it does pay off another thing that I tried to highlight last time for the first part of this book, which was the prevalence of characters' thoughts alongside their dialogue.
You had those like italicized inner thoughts.
I didn't notice that as much here, but I think this style of physical observation, it really pays off in Paul's moments of surreal insight. I talked about last time, I phrased it as him tripping balls the first time he gets hit with the spice.
That's right.
Where he then has this crazy insight into 1,000 possible futures and possibilities for what's going to happen and where he's going to go, and he sees all these lines and paths laid out for him. That's overwhelming. That's staggering, the sense of scale and space-time that's being opened up to him. But that feels natural and real because so much of the story thus far has already felt fragmented. And that we've been guided through these curated glances and glimpses. I was trying to think of a way to illustrate this point. If the story is a written patchwork of scenes and glances and observations, Paul is now getting these dizzying looks at the whole quilt.
Yeah.
It's a question of zoom.
And
I think there's as good a chance that he is a great guy and a savior, he's an evil dictator or fascist, or he just goes crazy and loses his mind.
Oh, wow.
Because he can't stop seeing the Matrix.
Yeah, okay.
And at this point, I could make arguments for all three.
I think that's a really good place to be when you're 3/4 of the way through your book.
It's so exciting. And it makes me think that I thought the roller coaster was going to start to fall after the Harkonnen raid on House Atreides.
Right.
But I've got more and more of a hunch that it may be yet to come.
Ooh.
And I'll get to that in a minute. But
okay.
That Harkonnen raid that I just talked about, which is the moment in the first movie where poor Oscar Isaac gets it.
Yeah, so sad because sad for the characters, but also he's so good, and I'm like bummed that he's not going to be in the movie anymore.
It's where we lose a lot of our great supporting cast.
Yeah.
That raid is effectively, if I'm using the parlance of the podcast here, that is the breaking of the Atreides Fellowship.
Yes, right.
And we see most of Paul's most loyal lieutenants scattered in the wind after that. He basically loses all of his companions and mentors because you see he has a different relationship with Gurney, who's Josh Brolin.
Yes.
Different relationship with him than he does with Duncan Idaho.
Right.
Who's Jason Momoa.
Yeah.
Different relationship than he has with his father. Like, you see all of these, you see the tapestry of the influences on this kid. And when all of those are stripped away, except Lady Jessica, it becomes a very different story. And I think the effect of that scattering, that ending of the fellowship there, is sort of shock and fear. Whenever those old characters return, whenever you find out, oh, this person did survive the raid. But then there's that turn. Did the character return? Did they survive? Did they have to change and adapt in some unsavory way to survive?
Sure, yeah, like what are they like now?
Or do they pointedly remain off stage? And the longer the story goes, the more I feel kind of goosed. When one of those characters who's in the wind, they're not on the chessboard anymore, but we think they might be out there.
Yeah.
They could be consequential enough that it would be worth it to bring them back into the narrative, but we haven't seen them. The longer they're teased, the longer we're delayed any knowledge about them, the more exciting that becomes.
That's really, really fun. What a way to keep the suspense and the tension and the mystery element without it,
risky
without
too.
It being about that, but it's still there and is really curious.
Because obviously the characters who remain on stage, mainly Paul and Jessica, they then have the weight of the whole story on them. It's a very risky thing narratively to do, but
it is.
I'm finding it so shocking and exciting.
Right.
And
it's a nice combination of giving your chosen one this big, life-changing moment where they lose everything, right? But you're not totally killing off your entire supporting cast that you've just spent a whole chunk of your book developing. So you're able to focus the story on Jessica and Paul, but also still have that air of mystery and what ifs around these other surrounding characters while bringing in new people. That's really that feels very masterfully crafted and orchestrated.
Yes, there's a density to the story, and I don't mean that it's boring to read. I mean that it's intricately plotted.
Right.
And
it's rich, not dense.
Yes, and every time he throws a curveball, there's an opportunity kind of nested within, because Herbert he's teasing some of these returns where there'll be a character walking out of the shadows, and I think like, oh God, maybe it's Josh Brolin, and then it's someone else.
Okay,
So there's that kind of sleight of hand of almost slipping in world building incidentally.
Oh, neat.
Where you think like I'm seeing all these old friends in the shadows every time there might be someone new on stage. Like, oh, it might be one of the people I love who's missing.
Sure.
But instead, there are a lot of new characters introduced into those voids. So it feels very deft, the way new characters are brought into the story. I was surprised at the number of prominent new faces in this book, because it felt, again, risky, unabashed, and memorable.
That's interesting, especially because if you introduce a lot of new characters, that can feel jarring and like hard to keep up with, and then you don't feel like you're in the story that you started. I mean, that's always the problem that like The Walking Dead had, because all their characters would die every season because, you know, it's the apocalypse. And then it's like, oh, I guess we have to do a whole new cast of characters. Then you're like, ew, I don't like these people. This isn't my show, you know. So
yeah,
that's risky.
And there's an element of there's sort of a relay race element there, where when certain characters are killed off, someone has to come in and sort of fill that void.
Right, yeah.
And a lot of the new characters I'm talking about, it's not that they took up a lot of time in this book. It's that they filled out certain roles that you knew had to be filled out.
Okay. Yeah.
So it felt natural. Didn't feel like they were replacing people or even crowding the dramatis personae of the book. It just felt like, oh, okay, I'm getting more of this picture.
Okay.
Because some of the prominent additions were within the Harkonnen sector, kind of quietly filling out that part of the world. And I think that speaks to the scope of this series, knowing that we will have thousands of years between books. The geopolitics of this world are incredibly important. Like, we have to move past Arrakis at some point and get a sense of the larger lay of the land here.
Right. And well, that just like helps you understand that these like larger political things happening are bigger than and go beyond just our principal characters who are in the here and now. So that makes sense.
And the more time you spend working your way up the food chain, I think the more teetering the whole thing feels. To go back to how Paul could sort of go either way here, it feels like that slow build to meeting someone like the Emperor, which hasn't happened yet.
I was going to ask, is it a spoiler to ask if you've met the Emperor?
No,
yet?
I haven't. And
wow.
I think that's part of this, where it's okay to talk about.
Cool.
Because I feel like I'm earning my way there.
Neat.
And when I get there, I will have a sense of scale and majesty and importance.
Nice, yeah. That's so much better than just having the Emperor be there right away. I mean, again, Sapkowski kind of did that with what was his name? Emhyr? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emhyr, yeah. Like, we didn't meet him.
The Nilfgaardian Emperor.
Yeah, we didn't really know he was the main villain for a while, and we didn't meet him for a while. We had other, smaller villains lower on the food chain along the way, so it's pretty cool.
And then we would find out that the big bad we were following was just like a peon hired by the Nilfgaardian Emperor.
Did Sapkowski, did he read Dune? Do we know? Is he familiar with Frank Herbert?
I haven't looked up the cross section there.
Because I know he's read like every fantasy book ever. Like, I know he's very well versed in fantasy. I'm curious because we're finding a lot of similarities. And maybe that's because we just read the whole series and that's on my brain. But we're noticing a lot of crossover there.
I think the density is a point I want to hit a little stronger here, because one of these plotting scenes where you see characters review and compare plans, it included a discussion of this idea of nested schemes and contingencies and plan Bs. The phrase was feints within feints within feints.
As in FEINT?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is something we another phrase that we had within the Witcher series, where they were talking about feints in combat.
Oh,
where you would pretend to do something and then do something else.
Yes.
And I think that idea appears throughout this story in stagecraft, in combat, and in narrative structure. Because it still feels like there's always something huge, new, and fascinating on the horizon, in the same way you've always got like the promise of a sandworm out there that you're looking forward to. But equally, you get these surprises from the past that are buried like landmines in every chapter. This book feels dense and rewarding in the same way a Snickers bar does. It's got layers. It's got payoff. It's got a harmony, Maggie, between its disparate elements. It's a joy.
I love that. Does it bring you back to your normal self when you are hungry? Does it follow the logic of those ad campaigns?
I don't acknowledge that ad campaign.
Got it. Sorry.
Another thing I talked about last time that I wanted to sort of follow up on is the shifting contexts and characterizations that have moved our principal characters, mainly Paul and Jessica, through the Shakespearean arc that I tagged in the last discussion of Henry IV Part 1.
Yeah.
We're getting more teases of Henry IV Part 2.
Nice.
And last time I was saying it felt like we had the Grand Rebellion, being the Harkonnen raid on House Atreides, and now we were going to play in the aftermath, which is what Part 2 does for Part 1 in that Shakespearean, the sequence of the history plays, where you follow the scattered heroes, the cockroaches, the schemers, and you adjust sort of your scale for, or is this a heroic classic story of a knight coming into his own, avenging his father, or is this what's left and who survives and the dirty stuff they have to do to keep living?
Sure, yeah.
We see some of that here where, like, Paul, or Hal, I guess he's the Hal archetype here.
Right.
The way Paul is challenged, the way he matures and begins to appreciate his father's burden, being in control for all those years. The wrinkle that keeps me from perfectly grafting the Henry IV architecture onto this book is the repeated references to Paul's terrible purpose.
Oh, yeah, you talked about that phrase last time.
Frank Herbert seems incredibly interested in doing this deconstruction, an examination of the Chosen One framework.
Nice.
In the same way we saw some of that in The Witcher. I think that's a common thing nowadays, but looking at
tearing that apart with Siri,
Yeah, looking at it done at this level in 1965
in the 60s,
makes it feel more electric and fresh and risky than it does in 2024, when deconstruction has been a tired cliche for 20 years.
Right at this point, that needs to be deconstructed. Yeah.
Listen to this phrase. Do you remember the ecologist who was on that helicopter?
Oh, yes. Yeah, the woman with the dreads.
Yeah, the character, I believe, is a man in the book, but doesn't matter.
They are. I've read far enough to know that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that character you see die in the first movie.
Yes.
That plays out slightly differently in the book. It's a beautiful chapter. It's almost a solo chapter. It feels like a soliloquy in a play where you just leave someone on stage kind of speaking to the audience, not directly, but there's that yearning, pleading, confessional thing there where they're going through this whole process of slowly dying in the desert miserably. And there's a line that I wanted to just kind of highlight for you as part of that internal monologue and that fade out. No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero.
Damn.
And hero is capitalized, just in case you missed the point.
What a, thesis statement for your whole story.
Yeah.
Damn.
No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's one of your cutaways. And then you jump back to Paul ingratiating himself with the Fremen.
Oh, geez. That is so interesting.
So that feeds that hunch, that sort of roller coaster vertigo, that the big Henry IV Part 1 revolution may be yet to arrive.
Okay. Because, that feels like, it's so, unfair to, guess where the author is putting their own personal feelings or opinions in their book. But that, to me, feels like Frank Herbert being like, this is what I think about heroism and leadership.
It's a little over, and it is that much more haunting to realize we're not in the aftermath.
Sure, yeah. And then he's clearly making a statement about and is maybe critiquing his own hero of his own
and the
story.
Conventions. And it's that much more damning to know how this story was kids bopped into the first Star Wars.
What a great way to describe that.
To give you a perfect track of the righteous hero.
Yeah, getting rid of all the nasty stuff that's not age appropriate.
And yes, you flirt with the dark side's tempting once or twice, but not like you do in here.
Do we ever actually see Luke genuinely struggle with the dark side? We definitely...
No, he wears black for a while.
We certainly see Anakin struggle with it. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But, Luke is and
that's the thing.
I'm fine.
That's the thing, because if you look at the prequel trilogy, they're kind of doing Dune.
Right, yeah. Well, because
there's a nature feeding itself of George Lucas does a bastardized Dune, and then 20 years later, he does Dune.
He's like, oh, wait, sorry. Well, if we bring it back to the Tolkien comparison, which we did a lot last time, that's often critiqued as this, overly black and white, simplified, hero is all good, villain is all bad story. But, that's not necessarily true, because the temptation and, possible descent into darkness is all the ring is. And you see Frodo constantly struggling with that with the ring. So at least like Tolkien does that, versus when you bring it back to Star Wars, it's like Luke is like, okay, dark side bad, got it. And that's like as far as it goes.
There's a lot more moral depth in Tolkien. Yeah. And I think there's a moral searching throughout The Witcher.
Yes.
So I'm glad that there's something comparable happening here.
Yeah.
I want to sort of broaden the scope for the last point I have here. I talked about Lady Jessica taking up, having a lot more screen time, having a lot more stage time, page time, whatever. She's more prominent in the book now because most everyone else is in the wind.
Sure.
The way Herbert has grown her character, there's some stuff here that I am so excited to see in the movie.
Oh, neat. Okay.
I have loved this character's expansion and exploration and maturation. Oh, she's so cool.
Neat.
But it doesn't just feel like, oh, she's in the chapters more. It feels like she has graduated in the narrative. There's an extra rigor spent on her character.
I like that because she seems like she could be the kind of character so easily who's just killed off early on. Like, because you're
like the dad.
Yeah, well, right. Because like your chosen one has to be an orphan, like, but it's interesting not only that she has survived, but that she's becoming so important and valuable. Yeah. I really like that.
And the way that Herbert is complicating her relationship with Paul is so good. Talk about those goosing moments.
Yeah, right.
There are a couple that were like, oh shit, in a great way. I'm just so excited to see where it goes. So you've got Lady Jessica leveling up in the narrative. You've got Chani, who's Zendaya in the movie.
Yes.
You've got Chani's expansion as a character, kind of steadily throughout book 2.
Cool.
You have Stilgar, who is Javier Bardem.
Okay, yeah.
You have the light touch, as he's sort of in a position of authority amongst the Fremen, but he's sort of earning his position within the narrative, because we don't know him.
Sure,
So we're getting to know him, getting to like him, getting to know his ways and see where he slots in here. I really enjoyed that. But my favorite was the chapter here where you get to meet the Baron's nephew.
Oh,
and that's going to be Austin Butler in the movie.
Yes.
I am so excited for that.
Again, I've only read a little bit of the book. I have met him in book 1, but he's very like on the side and like kind of not really doing anything. So very cool.
The 40,000 foot view here is that Frank Herbert's doing a really good job handling and fleshing out his supporting cast while diving deeper and deeper and deeper into Paul with every chapter.
Amazing.
It feels like it's a pool without a bottom.
That's
the way
awesome.
he's the highlight, the headline is not going to be, at the end of the day, Paul good, Paul bad.
Right.
It's that he's a fascinating character.
Yeah, he's a human who's struggling.
And I'm enjoying his inner turmoil and the turmoil around him as more and more people see the potential within him, that they could turn to their own purposes. It's such a complimentary series, or book, I guess, at this point. Only the complications we're getting to the central journey. The way this book is dealing less with sandworms than book 1 did. It wasn't the immediately interesting parts of this world.
Okay.
Book 2 is adamantly, rigorously, aggressively about water.
Oh, okay, cool.
Which
or
is
the lack of it, I suppose. Yeah.
It's
the
very
searching
like
for it.
It reminded me of in Lord of the Rings when they're out on the road. And suddenly they have to worry about, like, where do we sleep?
Yeah, right.
Where do we eat? These sort of food and shelter, meat and potatoes type concerns.
Yeah.
The way they handle that in this book, now that we are sort of on the road with Paul and Jessica, water is everything.
Yeah.
Water is currency. It's life. It's something to trade. It's something to covet, something to steal.
Wow.
And it sounds boring. Right? To say, like, I'm so glad this book was really about water.
Yeah, right.
In book 2. Instead of those cool, freaky worms.
It sounds like all the things that a lot of people scoff at when they think about sci-fi.
Including me.
Right, yeah.
If I hadn't
and me too.
read this, or, Villeneuve hadn't made the movie. But
yeah, like, no, you don't understand. The book's about water. Like, okay, cool.
It's like the culture of it. Through that Fremen lens and the psychology of water on Arrakis, you get more of a sense of tradition and infrastructure, but it never feels dry or flat.
Nice.
Like, again, the way he's handling all of these subjects and sort of evolving interests, it always feels conversational. It always feels curious. And things pay off so exponentially. Now, I know from reading some things online, That doesn't seem to persist throughout the 6-book series. But for now, I'm relishing it. I'm a pig in shit just rolling in my own filth. I'm loving this. And
Amazing.
when we get back out into the meat of the desert and we see some sandworms on the horizon, it means more.
Sure.
Because I feel like I've spent some time living in this world instead of watching it from the Atreides stronghold.
Right. So he is truly world building in that you are like fully understanding and are immersed in this new world.
Exactly.
Cool.
You have these new angles. You see things in a fuller context.
I mean, that's the best world building, is when you feel like you're in it and not like you're reading an article or a book, a textbook about the world. You feel like you're actually experiencing it with the characters.
I apologize if there is an answer I'm missing here, but looking at Dune Messiah, the second novel in this series, it's short. It's like 400 pages. Dune 1 is a big-ass book.
Yeah, it's like 600 or 700, isn't it?
And it's broken into 3 books.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Messiah is so much shorter makes me almost want to think of Dune itself, the first book, as 3 books.
Yeah.
Like the way that it's broken into books, I want to think of those as like 3 novels.
3 novels, yeah.
And then Messiah as the 4th novel, just because that would make them more of a piece.
Yeah.
The first book is like 360 pages, so that's close enough to make the
average
comparison.
novel. Yeah. Yeah.
Because reading this book 2 of the novel Dune, it feels like a really good sequel.
Wow. Okay.
And it reminds me, weirdly enough, we keep, time is a flat circle. It reminds me a little bit of Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Because the thing we loved so much about that movie is that it felt like a natural expansion of the original story and an even more natural escalation of that world, of those stakes.
Yeah.
I have no idea how this is going to blow up in that third one.
Yeah.
how it's going to hit that finale. But yes, a happy ending feels completely out of the question at this point.
Yeah.
And
especially if you got a lot of books after this.
And I'm excited to see where that turn takes place, where we move from Henry IV Part 1 to Part 2.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't, if we follow the metaphor, I hope it doesn't fall flat the way that episode 6 of Star Wars falls flat.
Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, I was like, which one was it called? Yeah, like, I hope, because we did not like that one. But yeah, I'm also curious about that. And I'm curious about how Dune Messiah will feel in terms of like length and scope and density compared to this. I mean, this almost feels like, this is a whole epic in and of itself, it seems like. So,
and it's part of it is about managing expectations and sort of setting expectations, because calling it Dune Messiah instead of Dune Book 4
or Dune 2,
right? There's a different. I feel like you set the table differently for the story. The comparison I can make is The Godfather. Godfather Part 1, Part 2. Part 2 is a continuation of Part 1, but half of the narrative is a prequel.
Right.
So that already feels like a reflection or a meditation on Part 1, which is itself this full family tragedy Shakespearean sequence of events. Godfather 3 is a continuation of that main story many years later, but so much of it is about echoes throughout family and time. And when that movie came out, Francis Ford Coppola wanted to call it Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone.
That's right.
And that sets a completely different expectation than,
Godfather
take the
3.
gun, take the cannoli, leave the... Like, it's a very different type of story, and that very much feels like Henry IV Part 2. The reason I talk about Part 2 so much is because I've never seen any piece of media have such an interesting, reflective, hollow, meditative relationship with a big, sweeping, exciting Part 1. So I'm almost using it as a benchmark for contemplative sequels.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that sequel is going to be Book 3 of Dune or Dune Messiah.
Ooh, yeah. That's really interesting.
So that's sort of where I leave it for now. But those are my thoughts on Book 2.
That's really great. I'm so glad you're still loving it. I'm so glad that it's continuing to just be, develop and be richer and more fruitful and more exciting. And that it's changing and evolving, but it's also not like but it's not staying the same either. Like it's doing all these things.
It's not redundant. It's not unrecognizable.
Right. It's not becoming
it's that
like
sweet spot.
Yeah. Right. Which is what you want. So is it making you really, really excited for Dune Part 2, the movie?
Oh yes, it's made me resent you for not being able to record for a few days.
Yeah. Well, I do know that. It's just,
no, I'm joking.
Yeah.
I'm excited to keep reading.
Yeah,
I'm excited for that. But
I'm really happy for you.
I'm also excited to hear your thoughts because I know Dune has
not
been
me, listener.
amassing fans and followers and theorizers and all that for decades. So please let us know your thoughts about Part 2. Try not to spoil things, but the ideas and theories that I've tossed out, the comparisons I've tossed out in this episode, please let me know what you think and what you've been chewing on with this series since 1965. I'm very excited for that. We've got the comments on YouTube, comments over on Patreon, or you can email us if you're more comfortable with that, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. Speaking of Patreon, $2 a month, you support the show. You can get access to the whole back catalog of bonus episodes. We do one or more than one new ones every month.
Yep.
And you can get access to the back catalog of 2025 that we've amassed over the past couple of years. Thank you very much for listening. I've got to go back to reading.
Yes, you sure do. All right.
We'll be back on Friday for a Game of Thrones episode. We're going chapter by chapter through that whole book series.
That is a lot of fun. So if you like us talking about books, that's the place to go. Because every Friday we are talking about one book chapter. And it's really great because Game of Thrones chapters are short. So our discussions are, that is our rice
dinner's
cooker.
Ready.
Dinner is ready. Oh, that's very funny.
Second dinner.
Anyway, that's what our discussions over there are really fun. So
and if you're just joining us, we did chapter by chapter for all of Tolkien and The Witcher.
Yeah, that's why we talked about it so much on this episode. So
a lot of books.
All right.
We'll be back on Friday with a brand new episode. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for listening and watching. I'm quite tired.
Me too.
All right. Bye.
All right, bye.